last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
And ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome back to Dark Matters Radio, which, incidentally, as you can see, is our very first live broadcast. It was a long time coming. I wasn't even sure, to be honest with you, that I wanted to do it. But hey, I figured, what the heck everybody else is, let's get it on. So here we are. Now, I'm not even actually in my real studio. I thought I'd try an experiment. And I'm doing this on my laptop computer. Now, I have all my equipment hooked into it. It's a good laptop. And by God, it seems to be working. And my very first guest in video tonight is currently missing. We were all in studio together before. Oh, there he is. We were all in studio together before we were ready to go on the air. And finally, as we're blanking out to do the introduction, Skywatcher said, "Oh my God, where did he go?" So I thought I'd have to do 2 hours of monologue, but thank God that's not happening. Well, here he is, Mr. Stephen Bradford. Now, Stephen and I go back actually many years, way back when I was doing my original, very first show, UFOs Tonight, on the cable radio network. Stephen told me he tuned in to a number of those, and that show actually ended up being kind of legendary. I don't know if I have ever told the story of what happened to that show, but one of these days, by God, I just might do that. It's kind of funny. But, you know, as we proceeded along a few years ago, I brought DMR to Cyberstation USA out of Boston. And we were on there for a number of years. And that's when Stephen really began doing a lot of contribution to the program. On Friday evenings, we would often have a live roundtable, all audio, of course, but I had a number of guys from all across the United States tuned in, and we had some, if I do say so myself, some darned exciting roundtable conversations. Well, Stephen has been on this network since, and I got a hold of him several weeks back, and I wanted to bring him on, and unfortunately he had other things he was tied up with. So we decided that we'd find out when both our schedules worked, and tonight it did. And as I told him, buddy, guess what? You are going to be on my first video broadcast. So, Stephen, by golly, welcome to the show. And how in the world are you doing?
I'm doing well, Don. Apparently, this microphone might not sound perfect, but on my next appearance, I'll make sure I'll get the good stuff. So I'm doing well.
Okay. That's great. Okay, look, one of the things that you were really hot to trot to talk about is the UAP report and the attendant garbage surrounding that, all, of course, emanating from the Pentagon. You've had some time now to think about that. And, it's one thing, and I'm not just buttering his toast because he's on the show with me. I've had some real esteemed feelings about Stephen's intellect. He really can dissect these things to a very fine degree. And Stephen, I was really interested in your take on this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's really just more of the same in that you really have, a official paper that when it gets down to the summary or the conclusion, rather, it says we can neither confirm or deny any of this. So everybody got so excited. They said that this was going to be the moment of disclosure. And ultimately what we're left with are more questions than answers. Additionally to that, we've got some video footage that, honestly, if you were to show it to me without any context, I would say it looks like a 1980s version of the video game Pong. You've got black and white, a little dot that moves across the screen. And we've got multiple instances of that. And frankly, I just don't find much of it very compelling. I think the eyewitness testimony from the pilot is compelling. I think when you match that with some of the video FLIR footage, it's compelling. And I will put that Nimitz case aside. But everything beyond the Nimitz case, in my opinion, is really just garbage. I think the Pentagon confirmed 3 photographs that they said were actual images, color photographs, and 2 of them were clearly balloons. I mean, one of them was, I think, unequivocally proven to be a Batman balloon. So, to me, it just seems like we're going down the same road of a lot of disinformation. And it seems once again that the military has picked a few faces to kind of lean on to present this. It was a few years ago, Tom DeLonge seemed to be really the guy that they were using to push this narrative. I think he proved to be a little bit unstable, and they've sort of switched right over to this Jeremy Corbell guy, who I've communicated with. He's a nice guy, but he just really needs to take off the believer filter and look at this stuff objectively. He just released a videotape showing UFOs that have FAA compliant landing lights on it. So, it's just so clear to me that what they're looking at here is terrestrial. It's conventional. It can be explained, but yet you've got this whole situation where everything is so drummed up to make it to be this massive issue. And frankly, I just don't find it to be very compelling, to be honest.
Well, I got to say that the Nimitz material and the material that came from the Atlantic Naval Battle Group that I saw, I found that pretty compelling. Now, God, what's it been now? 5-6 weeks ago, 60 Minutes did a special on this. Something, incidentally, I got to say, I never really truly believed that a show that had the longevity and the gravitas that 60 Minutes is supposed to have would ever touch the UFO or UAP subject, but they did. And the information now coming from my background, which I have a military background, I have a law enforcement background. A lot of that is dependent upon witness testimony. And those pilots that have testified as to what they experienced, I find extremely compelling. These people, men and women, have a lot to lose if they were caught fabricating. And it's not in their venue to do that. So the Pentagon even admitted, well, we don't know what this stuff is. Okay. So what does that mean? It could be terrestrial, the Russians, the communist Chinese. It's unlikely that North Korea or other possible enemy states like Iran would have that. If the Russians did, or the Chinese, I think we would be pretty aware of that by now, don't you, Stephen?
Yeah, I do. I think that our intelligence is obviously probably the best in the world by a long shot. And the idea that China or Russia has, capabilities beyond us, I think is possible. But the idea that they would be bold enough to use them off the coast of San Diego, to me, just doesn't, ring true. I think that that's something I just don't see outside of like an actual wartime. You could test that on your own stuff and not risk an international disaster. So the idea that it could be, the Russians or the Chinese, it's possible, but the idea that they would be conducting those exercises off of San Diego without us knowing, to me, just seems unbelievable.
And again, restricted airspace on the East Coast.
Correct. All of this is happening in restricted airspace. And I think that's really a telling sign to me. And it's glad that you picked that up. We heard one pilot say on the 60-minute story that these crafts are causing incursions over restricted airspace. I think he said every day for several years. And when I heard that, my most logical question was, if these were true unknowns, if everyone on that battleship, all the way up the rank, didn't know what it was, we certainly would have engaged and fired upon it. Absolutely. Maybe one instance you're not going to do it, but for several years of this, it just tells me that somebody on that boat at some place knew what was going on. This could be us testing a weapon system against our own conventional. It could be something that's a little bit more advanced, that's a little bit black project. We want to test it against our conventional forces to see how our enemies might respond. To me, that seems very light. And that's why you're not getting the authorization to shoot it down, right? Because somebody in that boat that could make that decision is not going down that road, because they're obviously probably read into the program and saying, no, we're not doing that. That's why you've got a bunch of 20-year-old sailors out there with their cell phone getting very bad, shaky footage of these supposed, incursion, enemy drones, or whatever it could be. And to me, I think the fact of the matter that we have not engaged these after what are clear incursions. I mean, Don, if that was you and I in a Cessna flying over a battle group conducting war exercises, our asses would be shot out of the sky, or at least escorted to the nearest airport. So again, it just something seems askew here. The idea that out of all of these incursions, we have just a handful of shaky videos, at least that we know of. Again, I'm putting the Nimitz case aside because I think that's a very good case. But everything subsequent, additionally after that, has just been very disappointing. And by that, I mean those 3 photographs that were taken from the cockpit that clearly show, in my opinion, balloons. The most recent triangular thing that actually the guy, Mick West, who I've disagreed with, has almost, as far as I'm concerned, conclusively showed that triangle shape was a byproduct of the aperture in the military night vision. I mean, he demonstrated it. He even found the same model and looked it up at the stars, and everything was a triangle. Every star in the sky was a triangle. So there's a lot of, I think, distortion going on here, maybe on purpose. Maybe it's to steer us away from the Nimitz case, which is good, and say, here, let's look over here, and then have all of it be very disappointing and underwhelming. So I think there's a lot of possibilities here. I'm just not ready yet to just put the hat on and go cheer and say, this is it, this is disclosure. Wow, look at everything. Because there's really not much to look at other than some bad video and some, old FLIR tapes from 2004.
But yet something has happened with this, Stephen, that has not happened since about 1966. And that is congressional interest.
Correct.
In this. Now, I recall vaguely, I was a sophomore in high school when the Hillsdale College sightings of UFOs happened. That ultimately ended up with J. Allen Hynek coming out and saying, well, it possibly could be swamp gas. That infamous, famous, which convulsed the nation in laughter. But one of the congressional reps at that time was Jerry Ford,
yes,
from Michigan. Ford was one of the people that really wanted to push this into hearings. Okay,
yes, he went to bat for his constituents. He was very serious about that.
Yes, and it ended up being the Condon Committee Colorado UFO study, which was, as we both know, a total wipeout. It was a total whitewash. Even at the end of the study, when they basically said, look, we don't see any national security concerns here, which was not true. There were still over 30% of the cases that had been given those people that were never explained one way or the other. Now, today, we have basically things running along that line. We do have a number of congressional reps that want to know what is going on. We have no idea what was in the classified portion of this report. But Stephen, the one thing that still to this day blows me up are some of the people that have publicly involved themselves in this. We have a former Undersecretary of State for Intelligence Matters, Christopher Mellon, that basically has come forward, putting himself on the record, along with others like Luis Elizondo. But Mellon, I've been doing this UFO beat for a long time, and I have never seen anybody come from that rarefied atmosphere into the public venue like Mellon has done. Now, that caused me to put my cop hat on, and I did a lot of thinking about that. Why? What conceivably would be his reason? Well, I came down to only several basic possibilities. Number one, they know that something is coming down the road toward us, and if it reaches us, it's going to be impossible to explain it away. That's one possibility. The second possibility, and I did a lot of thinking of my own military experiences. I was involved with intelligence. This is the biggest dog and pony show disinformation plan ever. Okay? There's that possibility. And finally, and this is something that our buddy Walter Bosley would probably really enjoy. What if this were elements of a breakaway civilization that left us perhaps 12 or 13 millennia ago? Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure, absolutely. And those are all fun possibilities to sort of digest and think about. And that's one of the things that I find fascinating about all this subject matter is it is fun just to think about all the possibilities. But I'll give you a third possibility, and it's the one that I've sort of settled on, and that is that these people like Mellon and Elizondo are actually approaching this rather honestly. They were part of this investigative process. They were exposed to a limited amount of information, a handful of cases, which really piqued their interest. And I think that they really just wanted to get more information. They became enamored with the topic. And that's where we're at today. And that's a very plausible situation, too, that these people were read into this program, which had a very small budget relative to the size of government, saw a handful of cases that were really interesting, the Nimitz being one of it, and deciding, like, how can you ignore this? We have to do more. And to me, that's also very reasonable. It is interesting. We're talking about it right now because of that very reason. It is interesting. So I can imagine if you were a part of a small project dedicated to looking at a handful of cases, that you might come away thinking, wow, this is much bigger than it is. And I would argue it is, because I do think that there are real mysteries here. And then you figure your best way to do that is to go through the private sector, get the media involved, bring it to the people. The people will then put the pressure on the politicians, and you sort of do an end round the whole bureaucratic Pentagon. And I think, honestly, that to me is what feels real to me. I just don't think Elizondo and these people, these 2 or 3 guys, are just really part of a massive disinformation plot that really ultimately doesn't do very much other than say what we already know, is they don't know what it is. So what a sort of sad conclusion to a disinformation campaign when you end up with really absolutely nothing at the end of it. At least make it salacious and interesting. Fake some good photographs and video. They certainly have the budget for it.
Yeah. Now, look, there is something else in this mishmash that I found greatly interesting. And that is the fact that basically they have not taken a look, at least publicly, in the historical record. Stephen, in the last just itself 30 years, there have been some astounding cases that have come out that were basically totally ignored. Now, it's going to sound like I'm beating on my drum, but by God, I broke a story in 92 involving a space shuttle mission, STS-48, encountering something in orbit and something else, and there's just no other way to say it, fired on it. And this object took the most amazing evasive maneuvers, and it was all done in a live video feed, okay, over Australia and New Zealand. Now, that is a case I thought would have reverberated around the world. And basically, it didn't. But back in those days, that was the thing. Media totally ignored these things. Well, I know damned well that the Pentagon is aware of this. Why do you think they haven't? If they were truly trying to discover what's going on, why in the hell wouldn't they have looked at some of these other cases? The Gulf Breeze case, for example, the Japan airline case in '86 over Alaska. There were a number of these cases. Hell, the Russians in Phobos and Mars in 1992, 91, 92. These things are astounding and they're mysterious, and they all go into this subject together, don't you think?
No, absolutely. And it's funny that you make that point because, we talked about the documentary that just recently came out called The Phenomena, which was very good. I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was recently on cable television, and I was watching a piece of it. And it was the piece where Jacques Vallée is talking about how he discovered the letter in Hynek's file that basically, it explicitly said that there was a parallel investigative group coinciding with Blue Book that was doing a deep investigation into these same sightings. The same sightings that Blue Book was dismissing, this parallel group was investigating. He has the document. It's authenticated. It's a real document. And in that document, Vallée testifies that they were doing advanced metal research on some recovered pieces.
Battelle Memorial Institute.
Correct. That's the one. It had many of the eminent doctors and physicists and metallurgists of that time working on the project. To me, when I saw that, and it refreshed my memory, like you just said, I said, look, if they were really serious about getting to the bottom of this, they don't need to look at blurry FLIR footage from 2004. They can just go look at the classified project that ran parallel to Blue Book and look at those conclusions. Why don't we start there rather than, act as though this is all very new and the government's just becoming aware of this as of, the New York Times article, when, as you said, there's a treasure trove of documents and data and analysis, all done by the same Pentagon, the same doctors, the same people with classified status. It's sitting in a file somewhere. Go get those. Let's start there. If they're serious, that's why I don't take any of this serious. I just don't think it's a legitimate attempt to get to the bottom of anything.
Well, we're going to take our first break here relatively quickly. But before we do that, let me ask you, what was it about this field that galvanized your interest? Your father had a very unusual experience back in the day, didn't he?
He did. He was a witness to what would be a traditional sighting situation that we didn't know at the time that it was later considered what was then called the Boy Scout UFO encounter. Of course, my father knew nothing of the Boy Scout UFO encounter, just it ended up being that he actually saw the same thing. So I've always had an interest in it because my father would always tell us about the time he saw, a UFO, a classical UFO. So even as a young age, that was a very interesting story. My mom would refuse to let him tell anybody about it because she was embarrassed about it. But, as a young age, rather than read Dr. Seuss and Green Eggs and Ham and Little House on the Prairie, I went and I checked out every single book I could get on UFOs, Bigfoot, Loch Ness monsters, exorcism. So I was that guy in like third grade.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dark Matters Radio. This is our very first video broadcast. And I don't know, I'm kind of excited about that. You can see my posters in the back. Arnold, Terminator, I'll be back. And my other one, The Christmas Story, Ralphie and the BB Gun. I love those posters. My wife was yelling at me, "You're not going to let those out there on the gun." Yeah, honey, I am. I really am. But we'll be back with a lot more. Stick around because the night is young.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
And we are back. And ladies and gentlemen, tonight, my guest, my very first video guest, Mr. Stephen Bradford, a gentleman that I have had the pleasure of knowing for many, many years. Stephen, before we went to break, you were talking about your father's sighting. Tell me a little bit about this infamous Boy Scout sighting.
Well, I mean, we didn't know it was the Boy Scout sighting at the time. As a kid, my father used to simply tell us that he had saw a UFO when he was about 5 or 6 years old on his parents' property. That was really, you ask him to describe it. he said it was, the typical disc, and it was about tree level, and it looked very strange. And he went and he got his father, who was then the fire chief and the flight mechanic over at the Air Force Base, and they all went out and examined this disc, basically hovering above the trees with, it was illuminated. He said that it sounded like there was a gas or something almost coming out from the bottom. Not actually too different than what Lazar says when he says there's that corona discharge that sort of comes out from underneath it. I mean, my father's not a very creative person. He has no interest in any of this other than this is what he saw as a young child. And that was it. That was a story. That's what he said. My entire, adolescence, that was a story. We would always try to get my dad to tell people the UFO story. My mom would cringe and be like, don't say that around other people. And it wasn't until I think around 1996 or 1997, my mother was reading the local newspaper. And in the newspaper, it was around Halloween. It was talking about all of the lore, that existed in Palm Beach County where we lived. And one of the stories was called the Scoutmaster UFO case. And my mother's reading this, and it was like the summer of '52, a bunch of Boy Scouts are driving down the same road where my grandparents owned a massive piece of property. The Scoutmaster saw something hovering in the trees, ran back there, came out and was all disheveled, and the kids were so scared. The Scoutmaster said, "Look, if I'm not back in 5 minutes, run to the nearest farmhouse and call the police," because he thought there was like a downed airplane or something was on fire back there. He wasn't sure. So basically, this article went ahead and located the Boy Scouts. They were all obviously older then. They're professionals. One guy worked at Pratt Whitney, was an engineer, really smart guy, bright guy. And he said, he says, we were driving down what was in Military Trail. We saw an elliptical bright thing in the sky. Wasn't sure what it was. And the Scoutmaster went in and looked at it. And my mother was reading this article, and she came in and she asked my father, she goes, "My God, this is the same story that you've told us." My father didn't know anything about this. He just saw, he didn't realize that like prior to whatever he saw and a similar part of the property from the other side, they were having the same experience, seeing the same thing. So you had multiple people basically attesting to the same story. And I think it really made her rethink her position on that. And she actually asked my grandmother, was that a true story? And my grandmother said, if my husband or, his father said it was true, it was true. So, one of those real anomalies, but that's in the Blue Book record. And one of my things my father did say that he told us, he says, look, the Army came out and the Air Force backed a truck up in there and dug up the whole area that the thing was hovering over, the craft was hovering over, and they took that material away. And if you look in the Blue Book record, there it is. You've got the trucks backed in, you've got the material being dug out, they have the soil samples all right there. So everything was consistent. And again, my father's he doesn't have much interest in this at all. So it wasn't as though he was, that was his experience, and it lined up perfectly. The time, the date, the summer, the same street. It was all very similar. So it was very interesting. So that was what really made me sort of look at the subject, I think, a little bit more seriously than maybe most people.
Well, earlier when we were talking about the Pentagon report, and I was talking about Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo and my thinking about what could possibly be the reason for these guys to come forward talking about something that, hey, let's not be remiss in reminding everybody. It wasn't that long ago that if you talked about this topic in public, people would look at you and spin their finger around your temple, like, ooh, this guy is talking about flying saucers, little green man. Oh my God, we better keep an eye on him. And suddenly now it is okay. The changes for me, because I've been doing this a long time, a really amazing thing. But my reason for mentioning this, it's no secret that I have a great interest in human civilization and its possible status in pre-diluvial times. Now, I was telling Stephen earlier, as a matter of fact, I have it right here, one of my prized treasured books, a book written by Richard Thompson, Michael Cremo, called Forbidden Archaeology. Now, this is a book that came out 1993, 1994. And basically, Thompson, who was a PhD, and Cremo, who was a longtime researcher, a longtime investigator into some very anomalous things, put this massive tome together, exhaustively footnoted. The data is immaculate. I mean, every bit of it can be checked out. It goes back, literally, the data goes back several hundred years. And the basic premise is the human race, you and I, Homo sapiens sapiens, are much more ancient than would be believed. For example, the skeletal remains of human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, have been literally discovered going back over 1 million years. Now, mainstream science will tell you that the human race is only 100,000 years old. Perhaps they'll stretch it to 250,000 years. But then you come across this material, this data, proven, by archaeologists that it was found in strata going back hundreds of thousands of years to even 1 million years, and it's unexplainable. Where did this come from? Now, what I found amazing, Stephen, in this book, and you read it, you told me years ago, the archaeologists and anthropologists that have come forward with this anomalous information have been viciously attacked by skeptics within their own discipline. And I found it amazing that basically the UFO topic has been treated the same way. Do you have any parallels about that you'd like to comment or remark on?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, as we discussed earlier, that if they really don't, when I say they, if mainstream science or the government, if they don't have an answer, a definitive answer, sometimes they just suppress it, they won't tackle it, or they just act like it doesn't exist. And I think look, I'm not a paleontologist and archaeologist. I have really no basis in this. So when I read these books, I'm doing it as a layman. Excuse me. Swallowed wrong. But what I will tell you is when you look at the Cremo information, it's all there. It's all peer reviewed. It's sourced properly, and there really isn't a adequate rebuttal on the part of the academic community to really handle it. I actually looked at a lot of the information today, and I looked at some of his critics, and what the critics of Cremo will say is, well, he is a Vedic. He is of a Hindu religion, which supposes that humanity has a very early origin and evolved over millions of years. So they dismiss all of the evidence, most of the evidence in his book, on the basis of what is really a logical fallacy, the genetic fallacy. That is to say, because this is how Michael Cremo came to believe this, therefore the merit of the evidence can't be entertained. And, he could very well be a Hindu, and also civilization can have an earlier start date. The idea that, he just believes this because of his religious beliefs really doesn't tackle any of the evidence he's put forward. So to dismiss and reject his ideas, and this is what they do when you read the critiques of him, because he is of a specific religion, I think fails to do science any justice. I want to see someone tackle some of the issues. Now, there's been a few proposed. They say, well, some of these fossils that were found at, a strata level consistent with 300 million years ago could have fallen through a fissure or an earthquake, or something could have happened, and something that was much younger could have fallen through and settled. But he's got others where there's volcanic ash that's actually solidified. I mean, it's almost glass. And next to that, when they get down to that level, are human footprints. And one of the things that Cremo does, which I find interesting, is he looks at the primary source, which is the source at the time, meaning the field researcher that actually found it in, let's say, 1904, that came across this discovery. He looks at her notes, and then he looks at the secondary sources, the textbooks and so forth, the things that have been edited. And he finds a very big disconnect. In watching his Google talk, one of the people that reviewed his books, one of the eminent scholars that didn't look at it too favorably, but what he did say is, he says, as scholars, we have not dealt with the primary sources nearly as well as we have the secondary sources, but the primary sources actually are where all the good information is. So this lady, archaeologist who found the human footprint in volcanic ash going back, I think, 3 million years, basically her conclusion was, well, it must have been a primitive ape man that had an identical foot to modern day humans. But, Cremo's rebuttal to that is, but we don't have any evidence that there was an ape man with that kind of foot, period. So again, science just puts it in the gray basket. They really won't take it on much beyond that, or they just move forward with textbooks that suppress it totally. Again, I read the stuff as a layman. I don't know necessarily where the actual truth is, but I find it fascinating, and I think that it's at least worthy of discussion. And what you see is what they do with him and Hancock and others is they really, like you said, they categorize these really smart men as sort of pseudo-scientists or kooks or conspiracy theorists. And I just look at them as honest researchers looking at real historic anomalies and just asking the question, what does this mean? And in Cremo's conclusion is it means that civilization had a much earlier start than modern day scholarship will give it credit to. So, I find it fascinating. I'm open to all of it because I'm not so pigeonholed in. I don't have blinders. And I think that the evidence, Don, hold up that book again. How thick is that book?
Well, it's close to 1,000 pages.
Right. So maybe one bone fell through a fissure because of an earthquake, but I don't think 1,000 other instances or 999 other instances of tools and shards of hunting devices found at different stratas, or, I think he even has large reptiles are kind of found next to human bones. And these are modern human bones. These are not, the previous Neanderthals. These are, upright, modern head, skull, the jawbone. There's one he found, a modern jawbone at some ridiculously depth of strata and they said, well, it was a hoax. Somebody probably dug a really long hole and threw it in there. That was really that was the rebuttal. Somebody dug a hole and put the jawbone in the excavation site. And I just, that's not good enough for me. I think that's, maybe you can argue that once, but like you said, there's 900 pages to that book, and I think they should do a better job of looking into it.
I recall about 25 years ago, NBC had a documentary narrated by Charlton Heston called The Mysterious Origins of Man. And it was basically based on Cremo and Thompson's book. And they used a number of data points that Cremo and Thompson basically discussed in Forbidden Archaeology. And I will never forget, the mainstream scientific community had a monumental meltdown. They snowed NBC under with complaints. And so I was shocked at their reaction. You'd have thought that they were sacrificing live chickens on air, the way these guys basically melted down. So I tracked it down, and I actually watched it the other day. And I got to say, Stephen, there was nothing outrageous on that show other than the fact that they were talking about this material.
Right. I think that when you deal with certain subjects and you start to take a lot of incoming, as Cremo endured with that special, in my mind, that tells you that you're flying over the target. When you're taking that much incoming, you're actually close to something. And there's a reason why. Because if it was superfluous and it had no bearing on anything, and it was such a fringe theory, let him have his little 1 hour television show and go on with life. But the fact that some of these topics upset so many people and academics, I think really raises some questions to me as a layman looking at this, saying, well, wait a minute, if this is just one researcher, alternative researcher with a crazy hypothesis, let him have his 15 minutes of fame and go on with life. But the fact they don't do that, they try to destroy these people, get their books taken out of stores, go after them personally often. And when I see that type of behavior, again, it raises red flags. Again, if you're taking a lot of incoming, you're probably over the target. So I never understood why people like Cremo or Hancock can't put out their information, go on TV and debate it, and live life, but they just won't allow that. And to me, I think is a really injustice, a big injustice, because poor Graham Hancock has been trying to debate the Egyptologist for, I think, like 15 years now, and the guy just won't do it. And Hancock's just wants to have a conversation, talk about ideas. He's not up there to one-up anybody. He's a pretty polite guy. I don't understand why they can't have a civil debate on these issues and let the people decide, or at least become familiar with a different worldview that goes against the narrative. What's wrong with people having different thoughts, at least looking at things differently? No, nothing's going to happen.
Well, have you looked at America? Have you looked at America today?
I have, and sadly, the sort of behavior that we've seen attack these alternative theories are now just pouring into the mainstream, where you just can't have a robust debate on anything. And it's really sad. And it's one of the reasons why I really like this topic, is because there are outlets like this where we can come on and talk about it. So,
well, I got to tell you, I one thing I've discovered in primarily this field, the UFO field, and like I said, I've been doing it a very long time now, and I have butted heads with practically everybody across the spectrum, from Joe Sixpack to people at the Pentagon, all right, people at NASA. And one thing I have discovered, much to my dismay, I might add, is that these people will take this personally and then seek to destroy the person they're in conflict with, not using the data or not discussing the topic itself, but trying to destroy them personally. And I got to say, Stephen, that is a sad, sad state when it devolves to that. And that's what's happened to Thompson and Cremo often, and Graham Hancock for that matter.
Correct. And luckily, there's alternative outlets like KGRA. I know that Joe Rogan probably has the largest podcast on human history on Earth right now, and he loves these topics. So he brings these people on, which I think is great, because at least it's exposing a great number of people to something outside of the mainstream narrative. And I'm not saying that one has any stature over the other, but I like the idea of people being exposed to different ideas and sort of having to grapple with it, do their own research. One of the things I love about this topic is as soon as you start to involve yourself in it, it forces you to actually go out there and read and look at some of the alternatives. Some of the stuff I read, I say that's garbage, that makes no sense, and I put it over there. But it requires you to go out and do that. And I think as a society, that's what we're missing right now. Everybody just goes right to Wikipedia or the fact checker, and that's where they get their knowledge. And nobody's reading anything anymore. And unfortunately, like I said, it's a gripe that we have with this alternative topics, but it's also now spilling into things in culture, politics, history, you name it. And it's unfortunate. So I think at the very least, if there's one benefit to this, is it forces people to think it's mind expanding, and it oftentimes allows them enough information to look at other points of view. Because I'm sure a lot of people will watch Joe Rogan religiously and they have no interest in lost civilizations, but they just watch it religiously. And then someone like Graham Hancock comes on and those people watch it and they say, wow, this is really fascinating. I'm going to go buy his book and read it for myself. And I think that that's the real benefit. And sadly, that's the way I think that in order to get people to look at this stuff objectively, that might be the route we have to go. As we talked about how Elizondo did an end around the Pentagon by basically going directly to the public to put pressure on the politicians. I think now you really have to go right to the people who are then going to go back into the universities and ask tough questions to their professors. And, maybe you get a different generation that's a little bit more open-minded. But, I'm hopeful. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I think venues like this at least allow for those discussions to take place.
Well, yeah, but universities are basically locked down, are they not?
100%. Oh, absolutely. The modern day American university is a disaster zone. There's no free thought at all. Everything is geared towards one ideology, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about economics, history, politics. It's very one-sided, and I just hope that there's 30 million people watch Joe Rogan every single week, and let's say 5 million of them read Graham Hancock, or 1 million of them. Maybe those kids then go into the university and start asking their geography teachers some tough questions, or their philosophy teachers different ideas, because it gets really boring when everybody reads from the same script and comes to the same conclusions because that's all they've learned. That's what a boring world that is.
Yeah, I could not disagree with that at all. Well, let's take a look at some of these alternative subjects that, well, you and I have personally kicked around in the past. Probably one of the most compelling for myself, okay, and I'm speaking strictly from my own interest, that I have come across in many years, is the mythos, if that's what it is, of Atlantis. This pre-diluvial civilization that allegedly blossomed and was riding high roughly 13,000 years ago. Now, Stephen, and I've said this how many times, something tremendously catastrophic happened about 12,000 years ago. Regardless of whether it was a volcanic eruption, an asteroid strike, and something, in fact, did strike Greenland. And right in that immediate time frame, the ice caps receded from what is today the United States, North America. The oceans ended up rising hundreds of feet higher than they were. Human beings, traditionally, throughout our entire long history, have always had settlements or towns, villages, close to sources of water. These areas were basically wiped away. Entire gazillions of animals disappeared in an eye blink in North America. The giant fauna that was then covering the entire continent, gone in a flash. Something happened. Now, I know you probably don't, but a lot of people find that, well, they just find it too extraordinary to buy into. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, when you talk about the actual age of the Earth, you're talking billions of years. You talked about how the ice caps melted and sort of exposed this part of the country, and that's just one cycle. How many times over the billions of years has that taken place? So this idea that we can sit back and say we know objectively, how old civilization is, or how many of them there could have been, or anything. It just the vast age of the Earth is so ancient and so evolving and so tumultuous that it's, to me, I think it's so arrogant to sit here and say, well, 100,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago, that's when we had humans. I just don't know how you can run that all the way back billions of years. I don't think that there's any idea what sort of civilizations could have existed, and that's okay. I think that's a fair kind of leaning. Just say you don't know. Why do you have to be so militant about what you believe is the truth? Because there's good evidence, and like you said, we've had these massive cycles in whether it's asteroids that took out the dinosaurs. How many times in the past has that happened? And to what magnitude? So that was just one instance. What if it was larger than that? What does that do to the Earth? What does that look like? So, I'm open to all of it, and I just wish more people were, and we could have more robust debate on some of these issues because they're interesting.
Well, the fact of the matter is, it appears that these extinction events happen every 13 to 25, 26,000 years. At least that's what the fossil record seems to show. And if that's true, you're right. This could be maybe the 5th, the 6th, the 8th time that human beings started to rise to really fascinating levels to suddenly be reset back to zero. But with that being said, we are at the top of the hour. We got to take that top of the hour break. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dark Matters Radio, brought to you by KGRA, and we will be back for another hour. Stick around.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button. So just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
And we're back, and second hour, Stephen Bradford is my guest. Stephen, you're still with us? Oh, that's good. I was kind of nervous we might have lost you again. You never know.
No. Not unless I swallow wrong and choke, then that might be the end of me, but otherwise I'll be here.
Hey, you know, I was thinking about when I was on the last network on Fridays, we often would have those round tables, you and God, we had a number of guys. We had a guy by the name of Ward. We had some other folks. What do you recall about that?
I recall how awesome it was just to, first of all, to listen before I called in. At just everyone was so colorful, and everybody had their own different views on the subject. So you guys could be having the most detailed conversation about the STS-48 NASA video that shows the UFO or whatever the object that's unknown move across the screen, and everybody's talking about that. And the very first call would be an intoxicated guy saying, "When are you going to talk about the Sasquatch? What about Bigfoot?" And it's just, to me, it was so funny because you're down this road. It's serious talk. You've got a guest on there that's dialed in. And then you get these colorful people that would call in, or Video Dave would call in, just hammered, just going on. And poor Don would have to cut the mic on this guy. So when I started listening to this, I just thought, my God, this is fun. I'm going to call in. This is, I started listening to it, just in my cubicle at work on the archives. And then once you came back on the air, I started listening to it live. And I'd get such a good kick out of it. I was like, oh, I have to call in this show. This is too much fun. And even one night you had anywhere to 8 to 10 people on the line. You had a guy that was actually in Iraq during combat missions, and he'd be there talking. You hear just mortar rounds going off in the background.
Yeah.
He'd just be casually talking about UFOs because mortar rounds are, and he was just so casual about it. He's like, oh, those are mortar rounds. Yeah, we might have had an explosion. Just very calm about it. And that was good. So I always liked the personalities. I found it more entertaining. I mean, obviously we talk about serious stuff, but the roundtable stuff to me was really just having fun calling in and just sort of approaching these issues in a lighthearted manner. And I think that's the way I kind of just take it in general. I find it interesting and I find a lot of it serious, but I do think it's fun to look at the colorful side of things. And certainly these topics have their colorful characters for sure.
Yeah, well, we ended up losing some of those folks. We lost Richard.
Yes.
Beginning of the year. And well, I'll tell you, Stephen, that was a rough one for me.
Yeah, Richard was a wonderful person. I mean, one of the great things about moving to the Valley was I was actually very close to him. So I would, stop by the house every now and then and take him to breakfast or to lunch. And it was really good time, really good to get to know him. That was a huge loss. I mean, not only was he extremely bright and interesting, but he was just also a very good person. And this world just doesn't have enough people like him. So, yeah, that was tough. And I just always liked his insights because of his interest in Eastern mysticism. He would approach these subjects from just a variety of views. And I always found that interesting that he would find a way to bring it back to his personal experience, which then I think forces you to look at things even differently, maybe more some of it from a spiritual way or even almost like whether you're manifesting something with your own mind or, again, I like to look at things from a different point of view. And certainly he brought some to the table that were really outside even the things that we talked about. And I found that always interesting.
Well, another really interesting, colorful guy, and I miss him, was Ward, our buddy.
Yeah, Ward was an anomaly. I mean, this guy was someone that would call into your show and religiously followed you for decades, and then he just really just fell off the map. And I don't know, very, very strange, very strange. Maybe the Men in Black got to him.
Yeah, or another guy, Ryan. Remember Ryan?
Ryan, yeah, he will still reach out occasionally on Facebook, and he's started his own business. So I think he's really buried right now.
Could very well be, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Vance. Now, Vance, we still hear from occasionally. But that was some great stuff. Now, one thing, and I've never really talked about this, but occasionally when I was on that other network, on probably 3 occasions, the people behind the scenes, producers, got whacked, shit-faced drunk, okay? And came in and they were arguing with each other. Do you remember that? And they had their mic on?
Again, this is I think part of the draw is it was really really entertaining, and I loved hearing it. I mean, you had an elderly woman that would call in. I swear she was on her second bottle of wine by the time she called in, and just slurring her way through it. But just an adorable older lady, and I don't even remember what she talked about half the time. But anytime she would call in, oh man, I would just hysterically laugh. That and Video Dave would call in just slurring, talking about who the hell knows what, and to the point you'd have to kick him off or shut down his microphone because he'd take over the whole show.
Yeah. He left us too.
Oh, really? What's fascinating about him is he had the the largest collection of UFO videos, and apparently they burned down in a fire.
Yeah, they were burned up. Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah, he was out in the Yucaipa area. He lived out there.
Unreal. No, the fact that the largest UFO library burned to the ground, I think is just, again, how telling, how suspicious. If you want to create a conspiracy theory, you can start there.
Yeah. Yes, we could. Well, tell me now, what do you see happening in let's say the next 6 months, Stephen? Do you see anything coming out of this report or any fallout that we might experience as a result of this?
A good question. I'm not sure what we're going to see in the next 6 months. Like you said, there's a classified component. So a lot of people don't know that this report had to be essentially sanitized to the point where it could be released to everyone. But I think that there is a classified section to this that we just don't get to see. Again, I don't know how compelling that data is if the overall conclusion that they released is we don't know what it is. So if there was some smoking gun that was in the classified part, I don't know if the conclusion would be we don't know. Although I will say Elizondo says, and maybe I'll get to where I think this is going, he did say that while he worked at the Pentagon on this project, he saw what he said, quote, high fidelity photos and videos of these crafts that the Navy has in their possession. So he was asked point blank, I don't know which of the shows he was on, is there something other than FLIRs? And he said, yes, I have seen personally high fidelity photos and videos, whatever that means. So I think if there is nuggets to truth to this, I think that the way we're going to see it is through these leaks and whistleblowers. I think that's kind of where we're at now in terms of a lot of information, whether it's political, whether it's inside information, whether it's politics. It's all getting released through whistleblowers. It's all coming through back channels. These are why people like Snowden and Assange are, out in Siberia, almost in one case, literally, because that's the way the mechanism is working. So apparently everybody's leaking right now to Corbell, and Corbell is using his platform as a hub to get a lot of this data in. I would argue what we've seen up to this point is underwhelming, but that doesn't mean that somebody out there on one of these naval vessels or somebody in possession of something more interesting than what we've seen isn't going to make an attempt to leak that. So I think if there is anything out there, it's not going to be in the form of government disclosure. It's not going to be through a Pentagon report. It's not going to be through ATIP or Elizondo. It's going to be through a whistleblower using a back channel to get this information out to the people and maybe force the government's hand.
Well, we're talking about 70 plus years of deception, lying, fraud, personal destruction of witnesses, lying to the public, people dying, people being injured and maimed. How could, in all honesty, in full disclosure, How could the government ever admit to that?
Right, exactly. And if you notice, I think that that's one of the reasons why they're moving on this issue as though it just happened with the publishing of that New York Times article in 2017. You never hear anything about the historical record. It's almost as though the government is approaching this in the public's eye and to the mainstream that don't have the level of knowledge that you and I have as, oh, wow, look at this information. We need to get to the bottom of it, when you and I know that there's this treasure trove of history where they have suppressed and disinformed and run psychological operations on citizens to suppress this stuff. So, yeah, I think that those questions are going to become louder, especially as things move forward. But I frankly don't know if the general public has the core understanding of the issue like we do to even begin to cause problems for those elected officials. And, you know, in the way these politics are very, very slimy, they're going to say, look, you know, we weren't in office there. That wasn't us. That wasn't me. You know, so they can approach it with you know, clean hands. But I agree with you. I think that there are there is a historical record that has not been examined. And I think if you're serious about getting to the bottom of this, I would start there rather than try to dissect these grainy black and white videos off of a FLIR footage system that really are so inconclusive you can't do much with them. So I would rather go back and look at what they've done in the past and start there. And who knows, maybe they've already done that, but to me, that's more interesting. And I think that there's more meat there. Again, talk about that memo, the memo that was between the Admiral and Dr. Eric Davis, the Wilson Davis memo. To me, that's far more interesting and has far more implications to this whole subject than anything on those Navy videotapes. I mean, there you have two people at a very high level talking about very real things that if most people read, their heads would spin. And that, as far as I'm concerned, was a real event. I think that you've done some research on that. I know Richard Dolan has done some research on that. It came from the Edgar Mitchell archive. To me, that's the smoking gun. So let's start there. There's so many other things that I would do to look at, where I would go to look for answers than what we see being debated on the front page of the newspaper. To me, that's just a massive distraction.
Okay. All right. Now, with that being said, and you're absolutely, Stephen, you're absolutely on point with the Davis Thomas Wilson paper. Totally on point. But it's obvious to me that going back to the very beginning, 1947, when all of this business began to burst into public consciousness, the Kenneth Arnold sighting on June 24th, and then within a week or so, the incident in Roswell, New Mexico, whatever that incident was. And let's face it, today, to this date, we still don't know what really happened there. We do know that the military has consistently and constantly lied about what happened there. We know that, okay? But somebody had to be in charge. I have no doubt Truman, President Harry S. Truman, put someone in charge to oversee this. Where do you think that went? What I'm getting at, okay, the big kerfluffle for years has been the so-called MJ-12 document, the MJ-12 group. Do you think that in fact was real, or something similar to that was real?
I think that the MJ documents are real. I think they're real. That doesn't mean I think they're true. And the reason I say they're real is because there's so many of them, and they're so well researched that one person could not have faked them. I think Stanton Friedman's done some research, and it would say some little tidbit like so-and-so was having a meeting at the Pentagon on this day at this hour, and Stanton Friedman went and did the research and realized that in the FOIA request for that guy's schedule, he literally was at the Pentagon that day at that. So there's a lot of stuff in there that only an insider would know. Now, that doesn't mean it's true. I saw an interesting hypothesis that said that these MJ-12 documents could have been actually created by our government as a way of using it as a piece of information to trade with the Russians. Like, we're going to disclose this to you. We're going to leak these to you. We have these documents, and then you're going to give us some information. So the whole thing could be fabricated in the sense it is a true document, in the sense that it does originate from our intelligence community, but it doesn't mean that everything in them is true. I think some of it's true because the best lie contains a little bit of truth. So I'm a little bit, in the MJ-12 documents are in my gray basket, but the concept of a control group with people that would take control of this subject or anything that's sensitive, to me only makes sense, right? You're going to have to compartmentalize that in such a way that only a handful of people know about it and can work with it. And I think that that's what they've done with this information and other information as well, or topics or subjects or research material. I think, though, it's just something you're familiar with, a lot of it has sort of come outside of government and has gone into the private sector, which is, again, very incestuous. You look at these defense contractors, they're basically made up of former brass within the Pentagon or the government. So it's really just a continuation of that structure. However, it is free from FOIA requests because as it's privatized, it's then proprietary. So I think a lot of this information has moved outside of government, but into these defense contractors, which are then essentially quasi-government, because who runs them? The guy that retires from the Pentagon or the general or this guy will then go right over to
that's the whole thing about the Davis Wilson thing.
That's it. There you go. Right. Exactly. Because, I think that's if you really want to get to the bottom of this, it's not in these Navy footages. It's not in these tapes or whatever ATIP found with their minuscule budget. I would rather look at the things that are in that Davis memo and start there.
When I read that, and first I gotta give Dolan credit for basically making all this public. I really think Dolan did a public service there. There's no doubt about it. But when I read those documents and I started thinking about how this, in fact, may have played out, and I interviewed a number of people when I was working on that paper that I wrote about the Davis Wilson thing. People like Billy Cox, a physicist that I know that I'm not going to name in regards to Davis, some other people that had experience with the DIA and Wilson when he was in fact in charge. And Stephen, it played out like I have no doubt in my mind this is exactly what happened. They can deny it all they want. Does it make sense that all of this would be protected under the umbrella of a special access program? Absolutely. Something that you can't even acknowledge an SAP exists, because that in itself is a federal violation. So this just simply read real. I would have bet $1,000 on this.
Yeah, me too. And I was listening to Dolan talk about this, and he does give some credit to our friend Greer for actually getting this forward, because Greer became close confidants with Edgar Mitchell, and then sort of using Edgar Mitchell's cachet as a former astronaut, they were able to get that meeting at the Pentagon with maybe some people from the Joint Chiefs or some representative of the Joint Chiefs. And that's where I believe Admiral Wilson was put onto this. Basically, he was tasked with, all right, all of this information that we just heard from Greer and the astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, I want you to look into this. And so at the very least, it all seemed to spun out from that. But I think that people interested in this really need to Google the Davis Wilson memo and read that if they really want their heads to spin. It's not going to be the front times of the New York Times and Leslie Keane and Jeremy Corbell. They're fun, but I think the real meat and the smoking gun are in documents like the Davis Wilson memo. I think that to me is really something that people.
And of course, none of this played into the Pentagon.
Pardon?
None of this played into the Pentagon report.
No. It's almost like if you wanted to take people's attention away from this, and this is sort of where I come down on a lot of this, is if, let's say, you have some major leak like the Wilson Davis memo or the Nimitz case, which is very good, how do you sort of limit that? You just release 6 or 7 other things that are not nearly as important, that are always disappointing, and you just occupy people's obsession with that. And that's exactly what we've seen. Everybody's waiting for the next Corbell video, and they're just and everybody's forgot about the Wilson Davis memo. The Nimitz is now on the backseat. They've moved on now to this flying pyramid that looks ridiculous with an FAA compliant strobe light on it. Like, come on, Don. The thing is flying and it has a strobe light on it. That is the exact timing as an FAA landing gear. And we're good debating what this is in the sky. The only reason we can't call it a plane is because the camera's so damn bad, it's blurry and you can't see anything. So, again, if our Nate, and I think one of the, Corbell is, again, he's a nice guy. He does good research. I like his films, but he is just so obsessed with the nomenclature of the military. And he writes on there, oh, this was from the Ops Team Observational Intelligence Group on the Viper class. All these buzzwords, but at the end of the day, it comes down to a really blurry video that was taken on some drunk sailor's cell phone. I don't, if that's the best that the Viper Observational Intelligence Unit can do, I can sell them one of my nice cameras and they could take a better picture of it, because certainly that wasn't it.
Well, it's kind of like when I was up to my eyebrows in my lunar transient phenomena information from the moon. I could not tell you how many lunar photographs I plowed through. And Stephen, they all looked like they were taken with a camera that had Vaseline smeared on the lens. Now, here were these astronauts going to the moon with some of the most high-powered, photography equipment in the world, Hasselblads and all of that stuff.
Sure.
And this is the best they could do?
Yeah, and that's kind of sort of how I feel about some of this FLIR footage. Now I understand the FLIR has a very specific, task when it's recording things. It's not necessarily looking for crisp 4K footage. But at the same time, it's, it's 2021. We have to be able to do better than this. These pictures, the pilot took this from the cockpit of the plane with his cell phone. I mean, come on. What is that? It's just, it's always so disappointing. And these cell phones, I will say, they are very difficult to take pictures, clear pictures at night with. And sadly, that's what everybody has in their pocket now. But the idea that the Navy can't equip their operational intelligence visual guys, and I think that's where that last tape came from. Have you seen it, Don, by the way, the newest one?
No, I have not.
Oh, it got released like 2 days ago. It was breaking news. Knapp, Corbell, Mellon, all of them did a 1-hour special on Fox to reveal this new footage. And it's 2 little lights in the sky with the strobe just going off in the distance. That's it. And it's shaky and it's terrible. And the Navy has authenticated it, and it's terrible. It's clearly a plane in the distance. And, Corbell will say, this footage originated from the vessel's operational intelligence team that is tasked with observing enemy incoming military. It's terrible cell phone footage from a drunk sailor. That's what it is. It is.
Okay. All right. Well, speaking of reporting today, we're talking about reporting.
Yes.
What's your assessment on the way mainstream media has begun to treat this topic, the UFO UAP topic? Have they reported it like somebody would, crime reporter would report on a bank robbery or a shooting, or, are they up to the task? Because until just a couple of years ago, they were all taught and conditioned to believe that this whole UFO thing is pure, delusional, tinfoil hat wearing crap.
No, I'm surprised at the reporting. I found it to be very good based on the information that they have. I think the information that they're reporting on isn't particularly good, but I think the reporting is good. I think it's fair. I think it's objective. This is one of the areas where I would give the modern day press a pass. I think they've done a pretty good job. I was watching The Hill. The Hill is they do a morning show where they just touch upon the different political views and subjects of the day. It's a daily show, comes on every morning, and they tackled the issue of the Pentagon report and some of this footage. And I'll tell you what, the panelist on there, I don't even know his name. I watch it, don't even know his name, but he was pretty well read on this, and he had some pretty good conclusions. And his point was, this is a massive disinformation campaign that the military is doing on people to hide technology. And to me, that was like, wow, that's a pretty sophisticated conclusion coming from a political anchor on a morning talk show that usually just talks about politics. So it seems as though they are at least taking it seriously. So they're not laughing at it. That's good. Like I said, I'm upset at the things that they choose to look at. I want to see this level of reporting and interest on something like the Davis Wilson memo, not on these totally benign and inconclusive videos that you can't really make any conclusions from. They're just nothing to them.
Well, you're once again directly on the money with that. Yes. So is there any way we can change that? Is there any way we can convince these people to take a look at that really meaty material?
I would hope so, but I'm almost at the point that we're seeing all this superfluous stuff to sort of distract us from the more meaty stuff, because that memo really came out of nowhere. I think Eric Davis then went in, had a quote in the New York Times saying how the government is in possession of, otherworldly material that they're testing. And that was like buried at the very bottom of it. It was really eye-opening. And it just sort of got glanced over. And then since that time, we've just had video after video, picture after picture of these things that just aren't very compelling, yet they're sucking all of the air out of the topic. So again, I don't know if that's intentional. So if you wanted to cover up something as groundbreaking as the Wilson Davis memo, one way you might do it is just flood all the media channels with a bunch of bad data that's really inconclusive, that's just going to get everybody's head spinning, that's ultimately going to lead nowhere, and just hope that other story just falls by the wayside. So some of it, I think, is maybe just intentional, and some of it just might be honest. I'm not sure, but again, we're talking about the government that's been, nefarious with this topic for decades. So I wouldn't put anything past them. But I was really disappointed how quickly the Davis Wilson memo fell out of the conversation in favor of these, in my estimation, far weaker cases. And that
isn't that design. The way it always goes, Stephen? It always goes.
That is the way it always goes. But I wouldn't give it. I would say that the press has done their job fairly. They've done a good job. It's just that the stuff that they're being sort of forced to cover, I think, is really just a distraction or not very interesting.
Well, one guy that has worked tirelessly for almost 2 decades. Out of Florida, out of your part of the country, was Billy Cox.
Yes.
And Sarasota, okay? And he's no longer with that newspaper. He had one of the most honest and reputable, blogs that he covered this stuff weekly, and was almost totally ignored.
Yeah, I meant to reach out to you privately and tell you that I listened to your archive interview with him, and I was familiar with him, but not really at the level that interview went. And I was really impressed by him, and it was really sad to hear that his blog was taken down and jeopardized, and they told him he had like a day to take it down because they were, remaking the website and they wanted to move in a different direction from what he was doing. And it sounded like to me he had a lot of great material there. Do you know if he was able to salvage any of that?
I haven't talked to him in a number of months, so I do not know. No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, but again, there you go. That's a situation where a lot of good research, again, is just really discarded and not treated with any importance, when certainly I think there was some good things in there.
Well, another news person, a journalist, a television personality that has worked on this for over 30 years has been George Knapp. Now, Knapp and Jeremy Corbell have been working in tandem on a number of these cases. What do you think about George?
There's a lot there. There's a lot to look at. He's certainly been heavily involved in this. I think he has a personal interest, but I think when you start working that closely with some of these agencies and people, whether it's true or not, I think it's hard to take everything at face value. And I think that's my issue with Corbell at the moment. He's just accepting all of this information from the Pentagon, from the Navy, from these insiders, and treating it as gospel, when history will tell us that that's not necessarily the most intelligent thing to do, because these agencies have proven time and time again that they'll more than happily release fake, false disinformation as a way of steering the narrative in whatever direction for whatever purposes that they want. And those purposes, and it might not even be known to us. We don't know what the ultimate end game here is. But, just look at Benowitz. Read the book Project Beta. There's instances where the U.S. government and the intelligence agencies will use private citizens to develop and spin a narrative that will then seep out into the public for purposes we don't know. So again, you have to tread carefully here. And my issue with Knapp and Corbell, unless they're participants in the program, is, and if that's the case, that is what it is. But if they're not, they're just going in head over heels for this stuff, and they're not really putting in the objective lens. They're not looking at it with the objective lens that I would have liked, because they're just taking the government at their word. They're taking these videos, these testimonies, and running with it and promoting it like gospel, when frankly they should be looking at it a little bit more skeptically and doing at least some historical analysis and seeing how this plays in. Because I've seen this movie before, Don, and it sure looks like they're just using these people as conduits to release this information that sort of shaped the narrative in a specific direction. They started with DeLong, and I would just say that they've sort of just replaced DeLong with Corbell. Corbell is now essentially the new DeLong.
Well, I came from an investigative background, investigating. And you're absolutely correct. And having worked in this field for as long as I have, the powers that be, Stephen, the government, NASA, whomever, always have their own agenda that they're working on. And you're absolutely correct. And when you point out the Benowitz situation, there's nothing in the world that is more telling than that. They, the military, apparently drove that poor man into, no other way to say it, an insane asylum. He had a complete, total mental breakdown. And you know what? They did it with impunity. Nobody was ever brought to account. But, in today's environment, who the hell is ever really brought to account?
Right, and Benowitz was just one example. They did the same thing to Linda Howe when they brought her to Kirkland Air Force Base and presented her. We talked about MJ-12 being a real document, in that it did have providence coming from the military. I would argue the document that they gave Linda Howe was real. It doesn't mean anything in it was accurate, but the military did give her a document that she read. So they messed with her too. And that's something that they have later admitted to. Doty and others have admitted, yes, we did bring her in there behind double glass. We watched her, we presented her this letter, and the whole purpose of it was to disinform and kill her credibility. So they basically told her, here, read this letter, because they knew she was about to do a blockbuster documentary with HBO with a big budget covering many uncomfortable topics. So they brought her in. They said, here, read this memo that we have that's top secret. And it said all this crazy stuff about aliens and DNA, just off the wall stuff. And they said, we're going to share all of this with you so you can put it in your documentary. Well, the first thing she did is she ran back to HBO and said, hey, hold the horses. I've got a source inside the military that just showed me a document, and they're going to give me all the information. They're going to put it all in the documentary. This is going to be a blockbuster. And then they strung her along so much, or HBO said, see ya, we're done with you. You sound like you're absolutely out of your mind. And the whole deal fell through. And then they kind of didn't talk to her ever again. So its situation is they didn't want that information coming out. So they gave it what I would call a poison pill. They led her along with this fake document that she then took back to her bosses. They didn't take it with her, but the information she took back and promised them these great things because she had a source, just like Corbell and all, the government's working with me and we're going to disclose this. And ultimately it was the end of her career. Now she does, wonderful woman, but she does a fringe little website and her days of winning Emmys were ended pretty much at that point. And that, I would argue, was by design. So again, you have to tread lightly here. You have to be more careful than I think Knapp and Corbell have been with some of this data. And I would just caution them and others to, just really
look. If there's anybody that would be or should be aware of how this game is played is George Knapp.
That's why I said if he's not complicit in it, then he's certainly just not doing his homework. Because
now, when we talk about George, we got to go back to the one thing that he is most well known for: the Area 51 Bob Lazar reporting. Now, Stephen, over the years, we have discussed this quite a few times. And Bob Lazar may seem like last year's news, but still, in the annal of UFO research in the last 30 years, there's not many bigger stories than that. Where are you today with that?
I put Lazar in my gray basket. I certainly think that he's been consistent with the stories. I find him to be very believable. I think there's some issues that I have with his background and some of the claims that he made early on that I think are hard to square with the overall picture, but I'm not necessarily willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater there. The idea that a low-level analyst could get access and be exposed to a highly classified situation or technology was a major objection to the Bob Lazar story. So many people said, look, this guy is a 2-bit programmer who maybe worked at Los Alamos in a low level. There's no way that he's ever going to make it into a project of this magnitude and have any exposure to it. And I thought for many years that was a very compelling objection to Lazar because on the surface it seemed to make sense. Sure, out of all of the physicists or scientific people that are qualified to handle this sort of, why would you pick him? And it made a lot of sense to me. However, I will say we have since learned of another low-level, lowly educated technician who had absolutely full access to the government's largest secrets, and that's Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was put in charge of our most secretive surveillance technology we had at the time. He didn't have a college degree. He had no academic pedigree, and yet there he was in the middle of the most sophisticated spy technology that we had, and he was a whistleblower. So these things can't happen. So again, I think that you just have to be willing to look at all of the information and not necessarily draw firm conclusions, but at least be open to it, because Edward Snowden, I think, is really a modern day Bob Lazar and a guy that was just plucked really kind of out of the classified world. Let's say Bob Lazar, he did work at Los Alamos, so he was at least a player at some level, like Snowden was a player. He had a job as a technician at some cutout of the CIA, and they brought him in to work on and develop this very, very sophisticated spy technology, surveillance technology, which he then blew the whistle on. So I guess, there's a good example of somebody similar to Lazar that shouldn't have been in the position that he was or ever exposed to the stuff that he was exposed to, but history will show that he was.
So once again, where does that leave us?
Well, it leaves us with, it's possible. I mean, again, with so much of this, and almost maybe by design, you can't draw firm conclusions. And I think those that do are the ones that I really just have a tough time listening to. I would put him in my gray basket. I think that there's a lot of things that he says that seems to ring true. And I find his demeanor more than anything, his believability to pass the smell test, at least for me. I feel like I've got a good BS meter. I can kind of tell when someone's pulling my leg. I have a good grasp on, the truth. And I can sort of tell, I can read a room pretty well, Don. I think you can as well. And with Bob Lazar, I don't really get the idea that he is making much of this up, and he certainly really hasn't profited too much from it. So, again, I put it in my gray basket. Interesting story. I think he has a lot of information that really, if you're going to dismiss him, you're going to have a tough time dealing with. Like, he knew when these objects were going to be tested out at the test site. He brought multiple people there. He passed the polygraph. He has been able to have one PhD professor that worked at Los Alamos. I think his name was Dr. Pringle, said absolutely. He remembers Bob Lazar. They worked together on projects, and there's no doubt in his mind that Bob Lazar worked there in a classified capacity because he was at the security briefings that he had to attend. So what do you do with that? So again, if he's at one place working in a classified capacity, it seems reasonable he can be somewhere else working on, even if not every part of his background is perfect. Every part of Snowden's background is not perfect. In fact, he also embellished his educational records and said he was a master's degree candidate at a specific university when he had no undergraduate. And that was one of the red flags. I can show you the article where one of the people doing his background investigation flagged that about Edward Snowden. They said, look, he's claiming he's in graduate studies on an online university but doesn't have an undergrad degree. But they let him go through anyway. So the idea that some of these things that they say should have disqualified Bob Lazar from being in that job didn't disqualify Edward Snowden.
Okay, now this takes me to something else here in the last roughly, 12, 15 minutes. This field, Stephen, traditionally has always somehow attracted the crazies.
Yes.
The whacked, the
My
weird.
favorite part of it, yes.
Yeah. Which traditionally has always been a huge black eye. Why so many people in the mainstream, if you will, regarded the entire field as filled with that. Now, as you know, I'm pretty well versed in the history of this field, going back to at least World War II, and the early 50s, the contactee aspect of this field has always intrigued me to no end. And what I really found fascinating, which I'm going to maybe expound on a little bit, is the anti-nuclear message that so many of these contactees brought out. The Space Brothers have warned me against nuclear bombs. We got to get rid of our nuclear bombs. Now, of course, at the time that drove the American government crazy, thinking they were all pinko commie, potentially pinko commie spies. So, what's your? I know you have a couple of these people that you're especially fond of.
Yeah, no, I will say, I think honestly that when you talk about the, sort of the message that the contactees had of the aliens coming to Earth to sort of save us or warn us about the catastrophe that could stem from nuclear weapons, I think really was a byproduct of the time. And I think it really sort of played into that peace and love hippie movement. Some of it predates that a little bit, but a lot of it was wrapped up kind of in that same time. And I don't put much faith in the contactees. I do love it from a sociological perspective, and that is very interesting. I guess in a lot of ways, there's Greg Bishop. He's a little bit older than me, but he loves the contactees. I mean, that's what he's written books about it. He finds them fascinating in the same way that Bishop finds the contactees of the 50s and 60s fascinating. I really find the frauds and the hoaxsters from the 80s and 90s to be super interesting. So to me, to someone my age, they're my contactees. They're these people like Dan Burrish, for example, who just tells the most fantastical stories. He's probably my favorite, but to me, he is the contactee of my generation. This is a guy who claims he worked out at Area 51 and interfaced with the aliens, and they created multiple timelines that he was able. Dan Burrish personally manipulated the timeline to save humanity. I mean, it just gets so crazy. And, this guy just sits here and he can talk on camera for 5 hours about this stuff without blinking. And to me, it's just so fascinating. And the stuff he says is so outlandish and ridiculous.
Don't forget the action commando aspect.
Oh, yeah. He took out Gaddafi in Libya. He was the guy that was on the ground. I mean, if you saw this guy, he's about 5'4", overweight, 60 years old. I doubt he could run a mile, let alone go do a commando mission in Libya. However, he's online posting this stuff, and people give him a forum. And I was talking, and again, we talked about this. I told you, made you aware of this once, and I had to bring it up to somebody else recently. I think Walter Bosley was doing a live YouTube presentation. I was in the chat, and they were talking about Michael Schratt. Michael Schratt. Oh, he's such a good researcher. He's so polished. Guy's a total fraud. He sucks. I'll tell you why. Because he bills himself as an aerospace historian and as a researcher. Yet he latched on to the Dan Burrish story for many years. In fact, he was the one that helped Dan Burrish create all of these renders, these artistic drawings and renders of S4. And he went on the speaking tour and peddled the Dan Burrish story. And to me, it's not necessarily it wasn't so damning to Schratt's reputation that he latched on to the Dan Burrish story, as outlandish as it was. What bothered me was the fact that Dan Burrish was so discredited in the early to late 90s by George Knapp, UFO magazines, and others, that if anybody who was claiming themselves to be a real researcher of anything should have easily been able to find out that this guy was totally batshit crazy and was not anybody credible. So the idea, on one hand, you have Michael Schratt saying, I'm an aerospace researcher and a historian, but he was unable to do even the most cursory research into somebody like Dan Burrish before deciding to give him 100 hours of his time to help him with drawings and renders and go on a speaking tour about him. 10 years after he's already been thoroughly discredited, to me, took Michael Schratt off the table. I don't think he has any credibility, because anybody that could do an ounce of research that even knows how to do Google would say, before I buy this guy's tales of aliens and research at Area 51 and talking to the aliens, before I spend 100 hours helping him develop renders and drawings of his S4, maybe I should just Google him. Should I Google everybody. Just anybody, I Google them. If I go on a job or take on a new client, I Google them. Who am I dealing with? Who is this person? And if you did that to Dan Burrish at any point in the last 20 years, you'd come up with enough information to realize this guy's absolutely out of his mind. But Schratt didn't do it. So that was my rant.
Here's the curveball.
But there was these guys in the Walter Bosley chat. They were saying, oh, Schratt's so good. And I basically told them, and he said, yeah, you're right. I did try to ask him about Burrish, and he admits now that it wasn't smart and he should have done better. But I'm just like, it kills it for me.
Hey, Stephen, here's the curveball. Here's the curveball. Burrish, why? Why is he doing it? Is he clinically?
I think he's psychological. I think he has I'm not a doctor, so you can't come after me. It's my opinion. I think that he is. I think he has some mental illness. I think he's one of those people that lives in his own delusion. He's created a fictitious world. I believe that he believes the things that he says. I think that he's just an absolute delusional person. I think that he is just not of sane mind, honestly, and it's sort of trickled onto those people in his sphere of influence. So the lady Marcia that he's, I guess, now married to or lives with, he's written her into the narrative too. So she now is an MJ-12 and she's a commando, and now she's part of this big thing, and together they spun this narrative, and it's a mass delusion. I don't think that they are profiting, because you think after 20 years, if you were really focused on just deceiving the public to make money or to profit, after 20 years of making no money and living in a small apartment in Nevada, you might just say, God, this really didn't work out. I didn't make the money that I thought I was going to do peddling these lies. Maybe I'll go get a job at Kinko's and whatever, just go make some money. But he's still online, still posting stuff, and it has like 9 people have watched the video. So, to me, that just screams mental illness, and maybe we shouldn't make fun of him if that's the case. But boy, it is entertaining. Certainly entertaining.
Okay, now, I'm sure you're aware that in the years that I've been in this field, I've probably met and interfaced with most people that are associated with this field. Not all of them, obviously, but a hell of a lot of them. One of them that whose family has quite a name is John Lear. Now, John Lear's father, William Lear, of Learjet fame and Lear Sigler Corporation, was one of the titans of, American business, American corporations. And John himself is a highly distinguished aviator, pilot. He has been flying, set all kinds of FAA records. And I met him originally in 1988 and have known him ever since. In recent years, we have not been at all close, but I've known him for many, many years. Now, today, the stories that John has glommed onto make my head spin. All right? Make my head spin. And I'm not going to sit here and go through a litany of them. You're aware of what they are. And if anybody is listening to the show is interested, they can certainly find it online. They can Google it. But what in your opinion is up with John?
It's something we call the UFO disease, and I think some of these people that get too heavily involved in it, and too emotionally attached to it, and they surround it, it becomes their whole life to an extent, and they're unable to look at things objectively. They tend to go off the deep end, and we've seen this with a number of people. And is cool of a guy I think John Lear is, and I think he lived one of the most colorful lives of any human being, maybe in modern times. I'll just make a little detour and say, if you're really interested, there's a podcast. You can type it in. It's called John Lear, the CIA Chronicles, where he talks about his time flying for a CIA cutout in Southeast Asia and all the adventures that he went on. It has nothing to do with UFOs, nothing to do with conspiracies. He literally just sticks to the time where he was flying those cargo planes in and out of Vietnam. It's some of the most, seat of your pants, hysterical, interesting, colorful stories you will ever hear. I like John Lear. But I think just he got so absorbed in it. And I think it just begins to shape your worldview to the point where he thinks there's condominiums on the moon and people are up there living. There's millions of people on the moon. And, it gets so crazy. I don't know if you could even take it seriously, but I do, again, believe that he believes those things. I don't know how, but he does. He does. He believes there's 1 million people on the moon right now. And they live up there with, he says, condominiums, shopping. It has a blue sky, yellow sky, an atmosphere. You can walk around outside, and I don't know where he thinks these people are, because when I look at the moon, I don't see very much. I certainly don't see condominiums or Walmarts.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now, speaking of outer space, Stephen, we're getting real close to the end of the show. We got 3 minutes. In your opinion, do you think that the American military government, whomever, has a secret, highly technological advanced space program?
I think
do we have good stuff out there flying around?
I think we have more technology than that is publicly known. I don't think it stems to the point where we have massive fleets of ship and commandos out there going out in the galaxy. I do think we might have some technology, some crafts that are capable of getting us into space. I don't think we're totally relying on the Russians. I think that we probably have developed our own space space organization that can get us there and get us back. But I don't think that we're not fighting intergalactic wars. We don't have massive motherships out there.
No. I didn't mean that, but I'll tell you, it's kind of a little game with me. How many times I've checked in with the feed on the ISS, the
there's stuff up there, no question, that we don't know about. 100%.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me how the camera often just gets cut off.
Boom. All the time. Yeah, and it's usually when something anomalous comes into the frame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ergo, my question about
that's something they're protecting. Space. Yeah, there's certainly satellites, there's technology, probably weapon systems up there that we don't know about. Absolutely.
Which kind of blows me away. Well, we're down to almost the end of the show. Do you got any final words or anything that you've been wanting to get off your chest that if you do, now's the time to do it?
You give me one more of these tequila drinks and I'll tell you where the aliens are at. No, in all seriousness, I just wanted to say how great it was to come on the show and talk about these things, because it's a little bit of an outlet for me. This is not stuff that I can talk about on my everyday life without people laughing at me. So again, just an enjoyable time. I think if you're unfamiliar with some of the things we talked about, look into them, do some research, and see if it interests you. And if it does, call in or write us some questions.
Yeah, which is always a good thing. Well, Stephen, as my very first video guest, it has been a distinct pleasure. Thank you.
I thought you were going to say a disaster, but I'm glad it was a distinct pleasure.
No. Well, I think, recently, speaking of, you're down in Florida, I'm out here in sunny Southern California. We've had a lot of humidity recently, but
I think we're at 80% humidity here, Don. So we got
that's a little higher than us.
Yeah.
Guys, that's it for tonight. We will be back next week. Once again, Dark Matters Radio brought to you exclusively by KGRA, and we'll see you then. Have a great weekend. Happy 4th, and we'll see you next week.